World War II was a violent conflict between 70 nations which disrupted the whole world. The war started on September 1st, 1939, when Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, invaded Poland. The war ended on September 2nd, 1945, when Japan surrendered to the US. This is the story of how the United States got involved in World War II and the events that followed.
Before the U.S. got involved in the war, the Allied forces consisted of the United Kingdom, France, China, and the Soviet Union. The enemy, the Axis powers, consisted of Germany, Japan, and Italy. When the U.S. joined, it joined as an Allied power. The Axis powers' main purpose was to make a new order of things and take over. And the Allied powers' main goal was to take down the Axis power and make a peaceful world.
Before December 7th, 1941, the United States was not involved in World War II. On that day, the Japanese bombed the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in order to distract America from other attacks planned in the Pacific Ocean and Southeast Asia.
On December 7, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards. Costly to our Navy was the loss of war vessels, airplanes, and equipment.
The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor killed 2,403 American soldiers, whereas there were only 129 Japanese killed, which was a massive win for Japan. The attack crippled many of the U.S.'s resources in the Pacific, such as artillery, ships, and planes. The bases on Pearl Harbor also took heavy blows from the Japanese planes.
The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise to everyone. The U.S. had to scramble to counter the attack and were not prepared in the slightest. The Japanese sneakily set up the attack and were deceiving the United States. Japan knew that most of America's battleships were docked in Pearl Harbor, so it was a very strategic move for them to attack. What wasn't very strategic, however, was not taking into account the power of the U.S. and the fighting that would ensue.
President Roosevelt presented his famous Day of Infamy speech to Congress on December 8, 1941, a day after the attack, asking Congress for a declaration of war. Both Congress and the people of the U.S. agreed that America should declare war against Japan and the other Axis powers to prevent future attacks and solidify their status so they wouldn't look weak.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war.
Congress passed the declaration of war and the U.S. was now involved. The U.S. wasn't alone, though. America had a few allies, most notably Britain and the Soviet Union. The U.S. wasn't prepared for war, however, and much money was spent to quickly get more soldiers, training, and equipment. To get soldiers, Roosevelt asked Congress to instate a draft, which was approved.
Secretary of Navy Knox conducts the ceremonies that mark the second draft drawing. The Secretary chooses a selectee from the previous draft, Staff Sergeant Robert Shackleton of Fort Dix, to pick the first number from the famous goldfish bowl. The lottery will determine the order number of 750,000 who have reached their 21st birthday since the last draft.
Soon, the military grew to over 2 million soldiers in 1941. In 1942, all men ranging from 18 to 64 years old were told it was mandatory to register for the draft. Some 36 million were forced to join.
Once the war started, a top-secret operation called the Manhattan Project quickly developed. The program began on June 18, 1942. The project started because scientists in Germany had recently discovered a process called nuclear fission. Hearing this, the US raced to beat Germany in making the first atomic bomb.
The atomic bomb is a weapon with massive explosive capabilities. When the nuclei of plutonium or uranium split, tons of thermal energy is released, causing an explosion of temperatures up to 1,000,000 degrees. The power of the blast pulls everything around it into one big fireball, creating a mushroom-shaped cloud. The explosion also creates a shock wave that travels for miles, destroying everything in its path. Little Boy, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, was made of uranium. Fat Man, the bomb dropped on Nagasaki, was made with plutonium. The atomic bomb's mass destructive capabilities made it the most powerful weapon on Earth.
The Manhattan Project was led by Robert Oppenheimer, a scientist specializing in nuclear energy. Around 130,000 people were employed to help on the project, though few knew what was really happening. These employees worked in three primary places: Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee. On July 16, 1945, the first test of the atomic bomb was completed, and the US had beaten the Nazis to it.
After 6 long years of fighting and countless lives lost in horrible ways, the Allied powers were finally winning. In the summer months of 1945, Japan was refusing to surrender to the US, even though Japan was out of resources to fight with. Because of the amount of prisoners of war in Japan and how everyone wanted the war to be over, America decided to take severe action.
On August 6, 1945, Little Boy and Fat Man were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki from two different B-29 bomber planes. Little Boy was carried by a plane which was named Enola Gay and was piloted by a man named Paul Tibbets. Fat Man was carried by a plane named Boxcar, which was flown by pilot Charles Sweeney. The bombs dropped silently at night, undetected, and with Little Boy carrying the power of 15,000 tons of TNT and Fat Man having the power of 30,000 tons of TNT, they each produced the most casualties that had ever been caused by a bomb in history. The bomb's mass destruction killed between 129,000 and 226,000 Japanese people. After dropping the bombs, the US told Japan that they would drop many more if they did not surrender.
Once Japan heard this, they knew that they were defeated. Less than a month after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, surrendered to the US.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world and that God will preserve it always.
Hirohito signed a treaty to finalize the surrender. The emperor made a broadcast through the radio to all the people of Japan announcing the surrender.
主張の石種を保守構想構想の神霊に社戦やこれ陳が帝国政府をして共同宣言に
The signed treaty forced Japan to accept all decisions made by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. Many Japanese officers ended up being charged with war crimes. Japan also gave up its control over Korea and a few other territories, such as giving the US Okinawa.
The war was finally over, and the invention of the atomic bomb, even though it ended the war, caused some to wonder, at what cost? Because of the hundreds of thousands killed in an instant. This would spark a controversy about the ethical nature of nuclear weapons and whether ending the war this way was justified. Most of the people killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were civilians and had nothing to do with the military. Was killing them worth it?
World War II was a war that will be remembered forever. World War II is the deadliest war ever in the history of human life. More than 3% of the world's population died. The U.S.'s involvement in World War II became one of the biggest moments in history. America became the first country to make a nuclear weapon, which forever changed war and the weapons industry. It showed America's strength and sent a message to other countries about its enormous power and influence. The invention of the atomic bomb, propelling the study of nuclear weapons in the future, is what caused the U.S.'s involvement in World War II to be a turning point in history.